we've got, it looks like we've got about 17 or so minutes for questions, which is plenty of time. So please ask lots of questions. I did make note of a couple that came in through the chat while people were presenting. So I would just love to start with those two. So if our speakers could come off of mute and come on video, then we can get that going. We can start with the questions. Awesome. Thank you so much. So our first question is from Alan Vasquez. Alan says, what are your experiences teaching statistics using Python, Julia, or R to students without programming knowledge? Is it possible to teach both stats and programming in a single course, or is it better to have a pre-required course on programming? Anybody want to take this one?
I can speak to it, at least from my experience. We teach an intro to data science and regression class where several of the students, they may have seen R briefly, but many have not seen it in the past. And I find it's okay to have the kind of integration of the two. Most programs, or at least our program, just doesn't have like the capacity to have another required class to get everybody into an R class before they take a statistics class. So we sort of have to make do with that. But it's been okay. There's like strategies that I try to sort of integrate it as we're learning the statistical concept. We learn how to do it in R. So you sort of like build up that way. And I also usually offer these modules like, so R has these nice Learn R modules that you can create. They're like ways to have interactive R learning that you can host on the web. And so I have those for my students that I optionally allow them to complete before they come in at the beginning of this semester. So if there's a student that's particularly nervous about learning R for the first time, they can have a little bit of exposure beforehand. But it's been fine, I think, for me to have that be something that I'm teaching alongside other concepts.
May I mention one point? So here at UConn, I and Junya and another of my colleagues, we've been doing for the past 3 years. It's a summer program. We've been really teaching those high school students, mostly the first time, including both programming and statistics. And what we found is really using a programming to teach some basic concept, for example, confidence interval p-values. Those for the mathematical concept, a lot of students may really find it challenging in the first time, but when we were teaching those, just as the students, just as learning the program language, we use the R, just to use a simulation to just simulate those concepts. We found it's quite effective for them to at least understand those concepts.
Okay, great. Thank you both. We do have a particular Julia question for you, Haiying, from Shane Sacco. Shane asks, if there is one, what would you say is the main advantage of using Julia over R or Python?
If I can only mention one, it must be the speed. That's very clear.
I think you can mention more than one. I don't think
yeah, and yeah. So if I can pick one, really, definitely it is the speed. And if I can think of others, I think the second one, Julia, is relatively new. I mentioned the disadvantage first, just because it's new. A lot of things are not available, and also this also actually is an opportunity for us actually to contribute those. But at the same time, because it's new, it really borrows a lot of idea from both R and Python. Just what is been good in those languages, they just borrow it. So because it's new, so a lot of functionalities and also a lot of implementations are more, I would say, intuitive or more effective.
Okay, so kind of like it came after R and Python, and so it gets to sort of pick and choose the best from both worlds.
Yeah,
and have everything be better. Okay, great, thanks. This is an R question for Lucy. So from Min Lin, we have Min asks, in R, is the native pipe, like, what do you prefer? Do you prefer the native pipe or the percent pipe? I don't know what we're calling that one.
Magritter pipe, I guess. I do use the native pipe now almost exclusively because I find for my students, anything that doesn't require one extra dependency is always a little bit easier to sort of, so I do try to always just use the native pipe. There's like a couple small differences. There are a couple things that like the McGritter pipe can do that the native pipe doesn't do. But I have not run into that being something that has motivated me to switch back. So yeah, I use the native pipe much more often. I'm curious though, Sam, do you do the same? I don't know. People probably feel differently about it.
Well, I unfortunately coding is not as huge of a part of my job, my day-to-day job as it used to be, and so I still just kind of stick with what I know. So I'm still using Control Shift M to make the percent pipe or the McGritter pipe. Yeah, but no, that's really interesting. It's good to hear about, and it makes sense too, right? You don't want to require another library. Yeah, that totally makes sense to me.
The reality is I'm almost always also loading for my students' purposes, they're loading the tidyverse a lot. So it doesn't, it's really exchangeable, but I just have sort of slowly moved towards the native pipe. I will mention that if anyone is interested, keyboard shortcuts are built, that McGritter one does have that nice keyboard shortcut, but you can change it if you want to the native pipe. So that's, one option if you're still used to using that Command Shift M. So.
Thanks, Lucy. We do have a Python one, so this would be for Sam, because as she said, Professor Tass had to leave us. So this is from Steve Walsh. So for Python, is there a notable difference between scikit-learn and sklearn?
This is actually a really good question. It's common. Come to find out, they're the same thing. Yeah, so Carol said they're the same thing. When you're installing scikit-learn on your system, like you might use a pip install command and you would install scikit-learn, but when you're importing packages from scikit-learn, you'd import from sklearn. They're actually the same thing, though. Good question.
Great. Let's see. So we've got another question from Chris Sankaran in the chat. Chris says, how do you hope that these languages will evolve over time, and how might the same data analysis look like in these languages in 15 years?
Well, that's a good question.
Come on, predict the future, people. Let's go.
Yes. So I don't know. I don't know that I have the answer. I think that more than just, I think that the languages might change. I think other aspects of how data analysis is conducted will probably change in the next 15 years, even aside from the languages. So things that are more routinized maybe will get kind of, I don't know, passed off to like large language models or something. But we're still important. Analysts are still important, but sort of figuring out which parts are the parts that we can use other tools for. So that is aside from the actual language, that kind of thoughts there. But I don't know how R will evolve. That's a tough question. I think 15 years ago it looked very different for all of these languages, so it's hard to predict whether these will be the most popular ones or if there'll be something else happening. Someone mentioned that large data sets and security will continue to drive evolution, which of course that's definitely true as well.
Yeah, Hein or Sam, anything to contribute? You want to look through the crystal ball?
The question is how I hope those languages will evolve. So because I've been using R for I think maybe 10, 15 years, and then I switched to Julia. So for me, I do hope just especially for people in the field of statistics, just pay a little more attention to Julia, because I do feel there are a lot of statistical program algorithms that some of them are implemented, but not really from a statistician, and they did a good job in coding, but sometimes in terms of the limitation of the method, I think if we do it, we can do it better.
I would say this is kind of fun as a student standpoint, so I'm stepping in for Dr. Tass. We work close together in IT for one of our classes. The class that I IT for that we teach together, it's for basic Python programming and data science. I'd hope that over the next 15 years that the questions are or that the programming languages are easier for new people to learn. I know we had a question earlier about what it's like teaching programming and statistics in the same class. Hopefully we can use some more of these large language models to uh, make the learning curve less steep for students trying to enter data science.
Great, thanks all. Anything else to add before we move on to the next question? I know that's kind of a fun question to answer, predicting. Okay, next question is, does anyone have any comments on Quarto? This question comes from Kun Chen.
I can comment on it. I did mine. My notebooks I used Quarto for mine, so I do like it. I've bought in. If you are an R user, you really don't have to change very much other than the extension to get Quarto to work. So if you're using .rmd files, you can basically change them to .qmd files and everything should still run. But Quarto does have some additional nice features that I've really enjoyed integrating in. And the other thing that's nice is that it is language agnostic. So you can use it, if you teach your students how to use this as sort of a general way to be able to integrate text and code, they can use it for any code that they might want to use. And it compiles like an R Markdown document to all different types of files. So you can compile it to like a Word document or to slides or to a PDF or to an HTML. It can make a website. So I think this is a nice feature. I'm not sure of other tools that sort of allow for that piece. Certainly, like Jupyter Notebooks do allow you to use different languages, but you're always going to have them in that notebook format as opposed to these other kind of ones that Quarto allows for. So there's my little pitch.
Thanks. And is it true that you can compile R and Python code in the same notebook, or am I making that up?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it's just by chunk. So I think you can
Okay.
have any, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, we have a couple questions about LLMs now, which I'm really excited about because that's all I think about these days with my job. And so, yeah, I would love to hear some answers about these LLM questions. So one comes from Anthony Gibbons, who says, for Haiying, since Julia is relatively new, are LLMs like ChatGPT and Copilot not as good at code generation as compared with Python or R? Do you have any experience with that, Haiying?
Honestly, the answer is yes, unfortunately, because I do have the experience. At the time, I do need to translate my code between R and Python because I'm teaching Python this semester. And also sometimes I need to change my Julia code to Python and R. My personal experience is for like the ChatGPT does the best job towards a Python, and R comes the second, and for Julia usually is the least accurate one.
Okay, yeah, I've written some R code with ChatGPT before. I had it write a Shiny app for me, a pretty simple one, but I was pretty impressed. I just had to change the data name and the variable name, and it worked right off the shelf. So yeah, pretty exciting. But we also have Jonathan, who has asked, do you think that LLMs will have a negative effect on the diversity of solutions to programming problems? If new users will learn to use LLMs as a crutch for the quote unquote right solution?
So maybe I'm too naive on this front, but I don't think it's actually going to change much from right now, naive users are going to usually try to solve a programming problem by looking at like Stack Overflow or other resources, and they'll probably tend to use your early programmers will use those. And I think that those same programmers are going to be the ones that might gravitate towards using a large language model, but I don't think that will drastically change the diversity of solutions, because I think we already for several years now have had it that for kind of most programming problems that people might run into, you could find someone who has done it before, whether or not it's the most efficient way. And I guess I think that I don't know, maybe this is naive, but I do think there are some people who enjoy finding, more efficient ways to do things. And I think that that still will exist, even if we're using kind of large language models for like people who are first learning at the baseline. So I don't expect it to totally wipe out the diversity of solutions, but who knows? Maybe I'm being too naive on that front.
Yeah, I don't worry it too much either, at least at the moment, because I do notice I when I need to translate my code to different other languages, most of the time I really still need to really work on the translated code. Usually they provide probably a working solution, but usually they seldom really provide the best solution. But I do worry about one thing, that is about teaching programming, because I do notice certain students, when I give them a homework, they can just really type in a few sentences about the problem, and then let ChatGPT or Google just give them the code, and they just copy paste. This is the thing I worry.
Yeah, that's a good point, Haiying. I was just talking with a professor friend of mine last night, and he was talking about how his students went to fit a Bayesian neural network model. And then he was like, oh, how did you do that? And they said, oh, here, I just did this and ChatGPT, and it gave me this code and it worked. So yeah, so I agree that that's probably going to be a problem. We have about another minute, I think. Anyone else have any parting thoughts, Sam, on LLMs or anything else we've talked about today?
I maybe parting thought about LLMs. That's the same thing as a student. I see it myself, classmates and such, or people in the class that I TA for. When it's a simple programming problem, they've been really effective at just using ChatGPT to not learn. But when the question that if we're trying to have them learn something a little more complex, ChatGPT usually fails. It's not designed for programming. Copilot's a little better, but maybe as LLMs become more sophisticated, I could see it being a crutch in the future. I'm a little worried about that. Hopefully, people will value their own learning and their own creativity over just getting a problem answered, though.
Well, I think that's a great way to close the session. Thank you so much, Sam. Let's everybody give our speakers another virtual round of applause, and we will move on to our next session.